The driver's going to be here in a few minutes, but I think I have everything all set. Got my package, properly labeled, UN number, proper shipping name, check. Consignee and consignor, check. Got my bill of lading all filled out. Packaging type, hazardous material box checked. UN number, proper shipping name, class and packing group. That's all set. But I feel like I'm forgetting something. Placards. But do we have any? Well, I didn't see any placards, but I did find these. That's probably too small for a truck. I'll give them a few more. And if they don't stick, the driver can always use tape. I think we're all set here.
Andy?
Hey, Mike.
What are all the labels for? You already labeled the package.
Oh, well, I have to give something to the driver.
Those are labels, Andy. The placarding requirements are a little bit different. Those labels, Andy, are too small to place on a truck.
Even if I use 4?
Even if you use 4, the placarding requirements are actually enlarged labels and outline some different requirements than you're used to with labeling.
So that's not going to cut it.
It's not going to cut it. Now let's head to the classroom and learn more about placarding requirements. Andy seemed real confident in his ability to complete the shipping process, but he did forget the placarding requirements, or almost forgot it. So the placarding requirements are covered in Subpart F of the Hazardous Materials Regulations, and he would have been responsible for at least offering placards for the material that he was offering. It's easy to overlook these placarding requirements, especially if they're not part of the Hazardous Materials Training Program. So let's take a look at Subpart F and see what the placarding requirements are. In Section 172.500, the regulations state applicability of placarding requirements. Each person who offers for transportation or transports any hazardous material subject to the subchapter shall comply with the applicable placarding requirements of this subpart. This subpart does not apply to infectious substances, hazardous materials classed as ORMD, and hazardous materials authorized by this subchapter to be offered for transportation as a limited quantity when identified as such on a shipping paper in accordance with 172.203B or when marked as such in accordance with 172.315 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now there are some additional exceptions there that you'll want to cover, but again, it's important to at least cover the placarding requirements for even the offers of hazardous material. Unless you're outdoors or on site, it would be impossible to pull a transport vehicle or a shipping container into a classroom to cover the placarding requirements. But it's not impossible to bring some placarding into the classroom to show students the differences between an actual shipping label and a placard. Let's take a look at the affixing placarding responsibilities. 2 people, the person offering the hazardous material and the motor carrier carrying hazardous materials have responsibilities here. So let's take a look in 172.506, providing and affixing placards, highway. Each person offering a motor carrier a hazardous material for transportation by highway shall provide to the motor carrier the required placards for the material being offered prior to or at the same time the material is offered for transportation, unless the carrier's motor vehicle is already placarded for the material as required by this subpart. And here are the motor carrier responsibilities. No motor carrier may transport a hazardous material in a motor vehicle unless placards required for the hazardous material are affixed thereto as required by this subpart. Again, 2 responsibilities: the person offering, the shipper, or the motor carrier, the person picking up the shipment. Andy was the shipper or the offerer, so he would have had to offer the placards for the material that was described on the shipping paper. What are the general placarding requirements? Let's take a look in 172.504 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Except as otherwise provided in this subchapter, each bulk packaging, freight container, unit load device, transport vehicle, or rail car containing any quantity of hazardous material must be placarded on each side and each end with the type of placard specified in tables 1 and 2 of this section and in accordance with other placarding requirements of this subpart. Now, 2 tables in the regulations, which we'll cover here shortly, but they provide exceptions for placarding or in some cases where placarding is always going to be required. There are no exceptions for those materials listed in Table 1. There is a popular exception called the 454 kilogram rule or the 1001 pound rule, and these will apply to materials listed in Table 2. So let's take a look. In 172.504 of the regulations, paragraph C describes these exceptions, and it states, except for bulk packagings and hazardous materials subject to 172.505, when hazardous materials covered by Table 2 of this section are transported by highway or rail, placards are not required on a transport vehicle or freight container which contains less than 454 kilograms or 1,001 pounds, aggregate gross weight of hazardous materials covered by Table 2 of paragraph E of this section, or, and then it goes on to describe requirements for rail cars. So that's the popular exceptions to the rule. Now there are approximately 11 other exceptions that apply to placarding requirements, and if your class or if anyone in your class ships under these types of situations, you'll want to cover each of those exceptions in class. Now with all of the rules for placarding, how do you comply with all of the requirements, such as Andy in the warehouse? Well, one easy way is just to take the shipping paper for the material being offered, locate Table 1 and 2 in the Hazardous Materials Regulations, and offer placards to the motor carrier for those materials that are described on the shipping paper, again, unless you've been accepted from the requirements. But understanding the exceptions is important to the process. Most commercial suppliers of placards will understand the requirements outlined in the regulations, but those offering the placards need to understand the specification requirements for placards, and those are outlined in 172.519 of the Hazardous Materials Regulations. Now that we know a little bit more about placarding, let's go and check on Andy.
You were right, Mike. There's a big difference between the size requirements for labels and placards.
Looks like you're getting set up here, Andy. Just remember that the responsibilities for placarding differ depending on the job responsibility. Shippers are responsible for offering placards for the hazardous materials that they're offering, and the carriers are responsible for displaying placards for the hazardous materials that they're carrying on their truck.
So I have to make sure I have the right placards for the driver, and the driver has to make sure that he puts them on correctly.
Correct.
I didn't understand the difference between labeling and placarding requirements until I was properly trained.